Welcome friends to this C++ session. In this session, we will understand one of the important feature of the C++ programming language, and it is being called as classes and objects in C++. You will find that almost every program in C++ is basically a collection of classes. In this session, we will understand what we mean by classes and objects, how to declare and define the classes and objects in C++, and also we will see how the memory is being allocated to the objects, and we will see some programming example. So as you know, you are viewing this session on my YouTube channel, Learn with Prakash Khanale, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to view more videos on computer science and electronics. The concept of class is being taken from the real life. You will find that in real life, we always refer to the different objects. Say for example, when we refer to a car, then we remember the car by not only its length and width and color, but apart from that, we will also remember the car, how its driving pleasure is, how much comfortable the car is. Similarly, a teacher, whenever remember a student, then he do not remember the student only by name or his age or his class, but a teacher remember a student by its various characteristics, such as how much sincere he is, what is the sincerity, how much attentive he is, so how much clever he is. So these are the different ways to remember a student. So you will find that in real life, any entity cannot be understood only by mentioning some parameter, but we will require many other things in order to understand it properly. We know that C++ is an object-oriented programming language, and in this object-oriented programming language, we have a facility to define a class. And class is a user-defined data type. You will find that every class in C++ will contain the attributes and methods. So it is basically a collection of attributes and methods. Attributes can also be called as variables, and methods can also be called as functions. So you can say that every class is basically a collection of variables and the collection of functions, related functions. And all these can be called as the members of the class. Object, you can say, is an instance of a class. So the variable of a class is being called as an object. You can say that a class is basically a blueprint for creating an object. So you can also say that class is just nothing but the object constructor. So whenever you want to create an object, then what you need is a class. Let us see how the class is being declared in C++ programming language. Now, whenever you want to make use of any class in a program, then you need to declare it to the compiler. And the syntax for the declaration is like this. Initially, you will write this keyword class. Then you have to write down here a class name. So class name can be any valid variable name. Then in the curly brackets, you need to mention the different members of the class. The members of the class can be specified by the access specifiers. There are three types of access specifiers that you can make the use of in class. The first one is the private, the second one is the public, and the third one is the protected. I have not written here protected because here we will not be demonstrating any protected member. Protected member will be demonstrated later. So access specifier can be private, and you have to write down this keyword private, then colon, and then you have to mention here the different variables or data members, and you need to declare them along with their data types. And then if there are any member functions that you want to declare as a private, then here you have to mention these member functions. Similarly, in the public category, you need to mention, you have to write down this keyword public followed by colon, and then you have to write down here the different public data members of the class. And if there are any public member functions of a class, then they also need to be declared over here. Once you complete all such declaration, then you have to close this bracket and then you have to put a semicolon. Now here you have to remember that when a data member or a member function is declared as a private to the class, then it can be accessed only within the class. It do not have any access outside the class. And when the data member or member function is being declared by the public access specifier, then such data member and member function can be accessed even outside the class. So for example, suppose I have a class. So here, first of all, I will write this keyword class. Then I have to write down the name of the class. Now the name of the class is suppose item. And suppose I have two variables or two data members, and I want to declare them as the private data members. Therefore, under the private category, I declare them number, which is of the data type integer, and cost, which is of the data type float. And then in the public category, I declare two functions. The first function is the get data, and the second function is the put data. And suppose the return type of both of these functions is void. And finally, I close a class and I put a semicolon. So this is the way for declaration of the class. So basically what you will find here is that any class can be thought of a capsule where basically it consists of the different data members, and these data members can have an access either only inside the class or outside the class. And it also has certain methods or functions, and even those functions can also be accessed either only inside the class or outside the class. Now, once we have a declaration of a class, then we need to define the different member functions of the class. Now, the member function of a class can be defined either inside the class or outside the class. Defining a member function means writing the complete code of the member function. This is called as defining a member function. Now, suppose we want to declare a member function only within the class. Then how can we do it? Suppose this is a class item, and suppose these are the private data members in number and cost. And in the public category, suppose I have a function, and this function is the get data function. Now I want to define this function only within the class itself. In such a case, what you need to do is that you remove your semicolon and then put the curly brackets, and inside the curly brackets you need to write down the different statements which constitute the body of the function. And then you can close a class and then you can put a semicolon. So when you write the definition of the function like this, then this is being called as defining the member function within the class. Member functions can also be defined outside the class. Means it is possible that you can define a member function outside the class. If you want to define a member function outside the class, now since you are outside the class, the syntax is slightly changed. You will find that the function header will now get changed. Now here the syntax for the class declaration, function definition for outside the class is like this. You have to write down first of all the return type of the function, and then you have to write down the class name. After the class name, you have to write down this double colon. This double colon is being called as a scope resolution operator. And then you have to write down the function name. And if there are any arguments, then those arguments you need to declare in the bracket. Then within the curly bracket, you can write down the different statements which constitute the function body. So you will find that initially we have to write down the return type, because every function has some return type. Then since you are outside the class and this function is a member of a class, so compiler must know it. So in order that the compiler should know it, here we mention the class name. And then we attach a scope resolution operator so that the compiler will know that this function actually belongs to this class. It is a member function of this class. Say for example, I want to define a function get data, and suppose I want to define it outside the class. Then simply I write it like this. Suppose my return type is void. Suppose the class name is item. Then I put a scope resolution operator. Then the function name, the get data. And suppose there are two arguments, and these arguments are, suppose the first argument is a, and this is of the type integer, and the second argument is b, and this is of the type float. And what I do is that I write the different statements which constitute the function body. Now suppose what I'm doing is that the value of a is being assigned to the number, and the value of b is being assigned to the another variable cost. So this is a way, isn't it? You will find that you can declare a member function outside the class. So there is a slight change in the declaration syntax when you declare a function outside the class. Now, once the class is declared and the member functions are defined, then you can declare objects. Objects are the variables of a class, or you can say that objects are the instances of class. Now, how can you declare the objects of a class? Object declaration is a simple thing. You need to write down the class name. Class is just like a user-defined data type. Therefore, here we will write down the class name, and then we will write down the object name. So class name and object name both should be any valid variable name, followed by the semicolon. Say for example, if already I have a class item, then I want to declare some instances of this class, say item X, and then semicolon. So X is a name of the variable or object variable of the class item. If you want to declare more than one object names, such as X, Y, and Z, then they also can be declared. And here you just can write them like this: item X, comma Y, comma Z, and then semicolon. So whenever you declare the objects for any class, you will find that the separate memory locations will be allocated for each data member of the object, because every data member of the object will hold a different value. Say for example, as shown in the diagram, suppose I am having a 3 member functions, and suppose there are 3 object variables, object 1, object 2, and object 3. Now suppose there are 2 data members for each object variable. Then you will find that every object variable will hold separate memory locations for the data members, while the member functions are the same, because a separate copy will not be available, isn't it? The same member function will be shared among all objects. So you will find that all objects will share the same memory location of the member functions. So every object variable will get a different copy of data member, but it will not get a different copy of member function, because that is not needed. Now, whenever you want to call a member function, then there is a syntax for calling a member function. And calling a member function can be performed like this. You have to initially write down what is your object name, then use here a dot operator, dot, and then you have to write down what is your function name. And if there are any arguments, then those arguments you need to write down and put a semicolon. Say, for example, if x is my object variable, then x dot, and I am making the use of the function get data, and I'm passing the values 100, 75.5. Now we are in a position to write a complete C++ program by using class. Suppose this is a simple C++ program where initially we have included the input output stream file using namespace standard. This is a procedure that we need to do because we are making the use of different IO operations, and therefore we need to include this file in our C++ program. Now I am declaring a class test. Suppose this is the name of the class test, and in this class I am having two data members which are declared as a private, data1 and data2. Data1 is of integer type and data2 is of float type. In the public category or in the public access specifier, I am here declaring and defining the two member functions. The first member function is get integer data, and the second member function is get float data. So separate member functions are written to get the values for integer variable and float variable. In the first function, what we are doing is that we are taking the value of the argument, and this value is being assigned to data1, and then we are printing this value. In the second member function, we are asking the user to enter the value, and this value which is entered by the user is read into the variable, and the same value is being returned. So here what we are doing is that we are defining the member function within the class itself, because our member functions are small in size, and therefore such member functions can be defined only within the class. Finally, I am closing a class here and I put a semicolon. Then in the main function, you will find that I have declared its return type as integer. Then there are two object variable declared of the class test. So O1 and O2, these are the two object variables of the class test. And I have declared another variable, second data of object 2, and it is of the type float. Now, first of all, what we are doing is that we are executing this function get integer data for this O1. Therefore, we write the statement O1 dot get integer data, and we are passing the value 12. And then in the next line, what we are doing is that we are assigning the second data of object 2 a value O2 dot get float data. So this get float data will be executed for this object variable O2, and this value will be assigned to the second data of object 2. And finally, we are printing this value of second data of object 2. And we are closing this main function. Before closing, we are returning a 0 value to the main function. So when you type this program in the editor window of any C++ online compiler, then when you provide the input data, you will find that you will get the result something like this. So since the first number is the 12, isn't it? Therefore, the number is equal to 12 will be printed over here. And the second data that you need to enter through the keyboard, suppose I have entered 23.3, then the second data, whatever being entered, will be printed on the screen. So thank you, friends, for viewing this presentation. Hopefully you have understood this very important concept of classes and objects in C++ programming language. If you want to write any comments or if you want to share any feedback, then you can always write it to me. Thank you. Thank you for viewing this presentation.